It falls to me now the privilege to introduce the Right Honourable Winston Peters. It's hard to introduce such a man. I think he's one of our longest standing politicians. Continuously sartorially savvy, perfectly attired, always, clear-minded. I think he's one of the bravest people I've met, and I think he's our most famous politician despite current polls. Mr. Peters' ancestors came here 1,000 years ago. People of the land, people of the sea, people of the community, people of service. I'm a Māori, but I'm also a Tongan. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Mr. Peters' rock star status in the islands. Because I first met him in Tonga, because I work between here and Tonga. And I've never seen a politician mobbed, like good mobbed, in downtown Nuku'alofa on a Friday night. People wanted to see him because he's famous. In Tonga, he's brown. Over here, he's brown too. Like in Tonga, I'm white, but over here, I'm brown. Both places, we're both cheeky. But people mobbed him because he was genuinely interested, no matter what station people had in life, no matter where they came from, whether they looked flash or a bit scruffy. Mr. Peters has a genuine interest in people and in the human condition and then how to serve. I recall matters like, in terms of courage, taking on establishment in the Wine Box Inquiry. Regardless of your thoughts about it, what an amazing crusade, and he was manoeuvred around but kept persevering with it because it was about fairness and a fair go for all of us. Often vilified by some media commentators as a lawyer, Mr. Peters is a staunch advocate of fairness, due process and justice, and he always has been. So whatever he's promoting, decrying, being attacked about, you can be sure that Mr. Peters will have thought it through, will provide interesting context from his vast experience, and importantly, he will ask the hard questions. And we have to hold mirrors up to our faces to ask ourselves hard questions. So here we are, enjoying the benefits of your lifetime of service, sir, here to the beautiful Warkworth Town Hall, which is lovely, with a wonderful audience. Thank you for your time on this lovely day. Please put your hands together and give a round of applause for the Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Teresa, Unify New Zealand. Tavake, after that introduction, I can barely wait to hear my own self speak. Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to speak to you this afternoon. And thank you for taking the time in your busy lives to actually be here, to make the effort. As you know, recent political developments in New Zealand are of grave concern to all those who believe in democracy, in freedom, and the rule of law in our country. It's alarming, but it is a fact. For we meet here today the beneficiaries of our forebears' vision 168 years ago. In 1854, all those years ago, to govern New Zealand with democratic principles. It was the beginning and the start. And in the broad canvas of history, as you know, down through thousands and thousands of years, democracy is a most rare form of government, but a fleeting flash in the history of humanity, and it's something we need to protect. We no longer can take the sound governance of our country for granted anymore. And as you know, modern New Zealand emerged from colonisation by the British. Some of us are half Maori and half Scots. Nobody's perfect, huh? Gives you a natural suntan and a desire to save money. Or as Billy T. James used to say, one half of you wants to get drunk, the other half doesn't want to pay for it. But whatever our backgrounds, we're here in New Zealand now, trying to build a country called New Zealand and a new emerging culture that includes not just some of us, but all of us. Whether we've been here 1,000 years or whether we arrived legally, and the word is emphasized, legally, yesterday. That's what a decent civilization does. Remember, the British themselves historically, though no one seems to remember, were themselves colonized, and they weren't too happy about it, if you recall history. Now, fortunately, a long time ago, we ceased to be a colonized country. And in the process, since gaining self-government, we have, as you know, due to our wisdom of our former leadership and all manner of people, over the years we have dropped the bad forms of colonization. We've tried to keep the best part of it. We have dropped a class-based society in favour of equality for all. We've dropped the tyranny of the few in favour of democracy for the many, for everybody. We've dropped privileged autocracy in favour of the rule of law. We have dropped government by the elite few in favour of one person, one vote, and each vote to be of the same value. Abraham Lincoln's famous "of the people, by the people, for the people" has also been a shared aspiration in our New Zealand history. At a time when there was no universal franchise anywhere in the world, we nevertheless, way back in 1854, not a perfect start, but way back we did start to make progress towards one person, one vote. Then, not so long after, in 1867, 4 seats were established at the beginnings of Maori representation in Parliament. This is not meant to be a history lesson, it's to remind some people of how long the journey has been and why it is so important to ensure we protect what we've gained. In 1867, 4 seats were established as the beginnings of Maori representation in Parliament, and in 1893, we were the first country to give women the vote. Now, ladies, it actually amazes me how so many people are proud of that. Well, you've got to admit that we keep on boasting about it. The question you probably ask yourself is, well, why didn't we get it in 1854? But not everybody's fast on the feet, and males can be like that. We set out, as I say, to be a world leader in democracy. And the pathway to democracy has never been smooth, and it's never been even in New Zealand. The evolution of social order really is, but we've got to keep trying. You know, between 1854 and 2020, at the last election, of course, all those years, apart from 2 wartime suspensions, this country has had an unbroken line of holding elections every 3 years in all that time, from 1854 to the year 2020. You know how many countries can make that claim around the world? Only 8 others. And on a good day, the UN's got, as they say, more than 200 countries in the world. But only 8 countries can make that claim, and we're one of them. And we should never forget why that's important. On our journey for fair representation, New Zealand has had many firsts. Now, in 1893, New Zealanders in a referendum chose to move from first past the post to mixed member proportional, or MMP. And our first MMP election was held not so long ago in 1996. But here's the tragedy. whilst the people went for it and accepted it, the media never have. They have never accepted that we're in an MMP environment. This is tragic when you compare it to other countries offshore with a similar system to ours. But I suppose it's much more easy to interview two parties than interview anybody else as well. Probably more convenient and takes less effort. But that's what has happened. In the 1890s, you recall, the Royal Commission on Electoral Reform, which led to the 1993 referendum, said that in time, MMP would prove in its diversity of representation that there would be no further need for the Maori seats. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at a critical time in our history when if you're a Maori, you'd have to be asking yourself, what about these policies come out of Wellington, and what about these policies is any good for me or my people? Because there are a lot of people on television waving their hands and smiling and trumpeting how this is in the interests of Maori. But I tell you, in places like Kawara or Morewa and all around the country where Maori live, they know nothing about it. And the last thing that's going to happen is that these policies will ever help and influence them. How can we have so many things going wrong in a country that was setting out in our lifetime, of many people in this room, to become a first world country, where we had the economic planning to go out and house people, from Nikau huts to Maori housing all over the country. And we're in the height of our success, not with all these well-trained university geniuses in Parliament, but a former generation. We ended up with no unemployment at all. Unbelievable. This all happened in some of our lifetimes. So successful were we that the Minister for Labour at the time who handled this issue knew the name of every person who was registered unemployed, not because he had an elephantine memory, but because there were only 29. Only 29. We did that in the past. How come so many people being left out now? And when you pick up the newspapers, you read the stats about education. They're disastrous for the country. They're disastrous for the general population. They're not good for Europeans. But boy, are they a disaster for Maori and Pacifica. The very human capital in which we seek to build a great future is being neglected by all sorts of experts with all sorts of ideas, accepting the idea to be a world-leading country when it comes to education like we once were. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is a fact. And we need to now get focused on what we're going to do as a country to ensure we do have a future the way our parents and forefathers dreamt about, including making sure that the phone's off when the speech is underway. Was that your mother? Or was that the landlord? Well, if it's a stockbroker, you might be at another meeting, but never mind. Ladies and gentlemen, this reminds me of a famous situation in the Second World War. In fact, this man used to write for the London Times under the pen name Cassandra, which you know, Greek, will know that it means ill forebodings, bad tidings. And he wrote day after day until the Second World War broke out, and the day it broke out, his column stopped. And the day after the war was over, his column resumed again with these famous words. As I was saying before I was so rudely interrupted. You know, the Royal Commission said, if we go down this pathway, there will be diversity in the representation in New Zealand Parliament, and in time there will be no need for the Maori seats. They were not making that recommendation on the basis of an attack on Maori, quite the contrary. They could see that there would be far more in Parliament coming from a Maori background to ensure that they would get far greater representation than back then just the 4 Maori seats. It's as clean as a whistle. That's what they wanted. You know, from the early 1900s, about 1919 until 1975, to register on the Maori roll, one had to qualify as having half or more Maori ancestry. You had to have half or more. Now, in 1975, the Labor government changed that prescription so that all you had to do to get on the Maori roll was to be able to swear or vouch and prove that you had in your background one Maori ancestor. You know what that means today? Even someone with one part in 512 can go on the Maori roll. Now, ladies and gentlemen, there comes a time in every profession and every calling when you've got to examine the facts. And you've got to ask, are the figures we're hearing in this country in fact accurate and on which we should base future policy? See, on the basis of the 1975 electoral prescription, that you only need to be able to recite an ancestor, and it can be diluted as one part in 512, the majority of Maori today are on the general roll, not the Maori roll. These are facts that some people in Parliament, like Willie Jackson and others, and the cheerleaders from the Maori Party, who want to disown everything that's colonial excepting the cowboy hat, need to face and understand. Because we're not going to go on with this uncertain prescription. You know, until 1978, in all those years, from 1867 till 1978, only 4 Maori had ever won representation in a general seat. James Carroll and Gisborne in 1887, then Ben Couch and Rex Austin in 1975, and then a small country boy from Ngāti Wai with a Scots background as well, from the Isle of Skye in 1978. 4 in all those years. However, since MMP in 1996, many MPs with Maori ancestry have entered Parliament, and in far greater proportion than their ethnic numbers in New Zealand. Those are the facts. You see, the Royal Commission, which set out that plan, we went for it in the referendum in 1993, which came into effect in political elections in 1996. The Royal Commission was in fact right and correct in what they said. And against that brief historical backdrop, recent political developments are justifiable cause for alarm at where our country's democracy is heading. You know, sadly today we are facing a government of some people, by some people, for some people. No longer the Lincoln dictum or the one that we ourselves adopted. It's not government of the people, by the people, for the people. It's just some people. Labor is destabilising our democracy. And they've got many cultural fellow travellers on that journey as well. Their baseless excuse for doing this is a manipulation and distortion of the Treaty of Waitangi with the intent of giving overriding power to iwi. And out there in the Maori world, the ordinary Maori man and woman has never asked for this, know nothing about it. But the claims are being made in their names and numbers, and the fruits of it will never, ever get down to them. It's like that famous line from the cowboy movie, The Outlaw Josie Wales. I can't perhaps use the language because it's slightly rude, but I might. You know when he says, "Don't piss down my back and tell me it's raining." That's exactly what's going on. You watch them on television, the news shows, all this goodness they're doing for Maori. Ladies and gentlemen, some of us in this room, and my colleague, former colleague Shane Jones is here and others, and many others of you I can respectfully say, some of us do know something about what poverty tastes, smells and feels like. That's our background. But we were the beneficiaries of previous generations of politicians across the political divide in Parliament who set out to give us the 4 things we really needed. Our families were lucky. We went from difficult times to times of great improvement. And the one thing that was there now that's not there at the moment is no matter how difficult things were, we always had hope. We knew that if we worked and saved, tomorrow it would be better. And it was. Ladies and gentlemen, there are 4 critical things that Maori want. Safe, affordable housing, ready access to our health system should they need it. The third is access to first world education, a system where their young can progress as far as their ambition, work and commitment can take them. And fourth, first world incomes. Free to be equal because they have been trained to be. Free to be equal because they have been trained to be. Now, those Maori aspirations are not unique. All over New Zealand, that's what everybody needs and tells me they want. And all over the world, that's what all people need and tell me they want. And all over the world, enlightened governments understand that and try to accommodate that ambition. However, today in New Zealand, the present Labour government is doing very little for those 4 needs, and everything for cultural trickle-down. And they're telling you it's raining. Labour and their cultural fellow travellers have a mistaken belief that plastering the public sector with treaty references and Maori unintelligible titles will, by some process of mysterious political osmosis, improve the lot of the whānau and the family and the country. You know, you came here on a road that's handled by a boat. Waka kotahi. Ask 95% of New Zealanders who waka kotahi is, and they don't know. This is astonishing stuff for a country in the 21st century. There was a time in the United States when there was a movement called the Know Nothing movement and Know Nothingism. It's turned into a feature of our politics in New Zealand. People don't know what they're hearing. Yet night after night on television it's being rammed down your throat. What a compliant people you are. Or are you like me, getting a bit brassed off? There are a lot of you in this hall which, like me, should be retiring and looking after the marvellous things that this country has to offer. But if you've got to worry every time you read the next news headline about where your country's going, who wants to be retiring in that circumstance? We've got to do something about it. You know, they're wantonly blind to the grave dangers of separatist policies and indeed the lessons of history. And believe this, the greatest victims of these policies will be ordinary Maori in whose name and numbers these misguided policies are claimed in the first place. They'll be the greatest victims, make no bones about it. When it's all finished, they will have missed out more than anyone else. And their needs will have been forgotten more than anyone else's. Majority Maori numbers are ignored, whilst elite minority Maori interests prevail. You know how it goes. It's no different in the Maori world. What was it said by the famous architect of capitalism? He said, men of business seldom meet for food or conversation. Without that conversation soon turns to a conspiracy against the public. Without their conversation soon turns to conspiracy against the public. And that is what's happening in the Maori world. Because all these things that are told by these so-called leaders, transient as they are, in the interests of Maori, never get to the Maori. But education, first world health, and decent housing, and first world incomes will. The civil rights movement, you know, in contrast in the United States, you'll recall that the civil rights movement in the United States saw black Americans seeking to bust down the doors to gain access to the best institutions white Americans enjoyed. The campaign was about that. We're black and we want to be part of what you've got. We want to go to the best universities, we want to be doctors, we want to be lawyers, we want to be what you are. And they were utterly focused. They kept their eyes on the prize. And it ended up with countless black people in Congress in the United States and a black American president. In contrast, back here, all sorts of race-based separatist institutions have become the norm, one after the other. You want to get yourself fixed? Well, you don't go to the doctor or the nurse anymore. You've got to go and find a Maori health giver. Now, I know something about Maori world. My mother was a nurse in times when people were poor. And everybody back then, all they were concerned about was getting treatment, and as quick as possible. And if it came from a European or somebody else, it didn't matter. And we have got to get back to delivering not the policy, but to deliver the service. Now, you've all heard of Labour's Three Waters. Is somebody worrying about that phone? No. Don't you remember that request to be kind? Didn't last long, but can I ask you to turn that phone off? I'm not making the phone call to you, and you should have it off. Where were we now? Yes, I know. I just can't believe after that clear request by Tavaki to turn the phones off, somebody still got it on. However, you're working for the fire service or one of those first responders, I can quite understand how you can't even get half a day off. That's how bad things are at the moment. Under Labour's Three Waters, 4 new massive water agencies will control our water assets and water infrastructure. And you will pay their costs directly. It'll be you who'll be paying it, and you'll have absolutely no say at all in what goes on. A 12-member board will control each new agency. 6 will come from local iwi, and 6 will come from the local councils. The very councils who, in your name, paid for and provide the assets. As I say, I think you should all sign up for the Mother Teresa Society. Because around about now, in other countries, they'll be having a riot. And everybody's sitting here and taking it. Well, maybe, Tavaki, is this the northernmost branch of the Mother Teresa Society? Because they're paying for it, it's their asset, and it's been taken off right under your nose. 6 will come from local iwi, that's on the agency of 12, and 6 will come from the local councils. The very councils who in your name and with your money provided the assets. But here's the rub. If that's not bad enough, 75% of each new board must agree before a decision can be arrived at. Do the maths. Who will have the final say? Come on. Do the maths. Who's going to have the final say? The majority or the minority? Your council or the local iwi? And in the whole of the South Island, the 20 local body authorities will have just 6 seats in total. This seems and screams unfairness, inequality, and malignant bias. No amount of smiling and hand-waving at the camera can disguise what's going on here. Labor wants to take community-owned assets, owned by all New Zealanders of widely diverse backgrounds, and strip them away from their rightful owners and hand them to shadowy corporations. These unaccountable creatures will be all-powerful, and as the Auditor General has already pointed out, not accountable to the community, not accountable to you. These shadowy corporations will bypass you in favour of private Maori tribal corporations becoming water barons. And no one in the ordinary world of Maori, in the Kawarau's, in the Morewas, in the Gisbornes, or in the South Auckland, ever asked for that. But the claims are being made in their name. And a whole lot of people who don't know what day it is in the Maori world are saying, well, that must be right then. Let's go along with it. Without any regard to equity, fairness, and dare I say it, certainty and performance of the product we're talking about, and that's water. These corporates were not created to advance the public interest, but to inflate the elite interests of some of their own members. And if they're allowed to exist, the mass majority of all New Zealanders, regardless of their ethnic background, will pay and suffer for it. Ladies and gentlemen, when did Labor ever ask you for your consent to these changes, to your assets and your ownership? When did Labor ever ask you, or the Greens, or the Maori Party, or all those, what I call, without being, and it's not racist, it's a statement, or all those sickly white liberals that go along with it on the basis it must be right if they're asking for it? When did they ever ask you? No, they never did. And they never will. Unless you make it very clear that when you get into that polling booth next election, for that brief minute that you're there, that you're the boss. No, you should have protested the last election. What happened? All right. Come on. Some of us made the effort. Some of us were a handbrake. Some of us for 3 years were stopping all these stupid ideas. But you decided a car with no handbrake's better. And in the last 15 months, we just had an emerging series of disasters because they never had the experience in the first place. And balance and experience matters in government. All manner of changes are being dumped upon New Zealanders that were never mentioned in the run-up to the 2020 election. You never heard any of that in the run-up to the 2020 election. In short, a government that is fanatical about mandates on these matters has no mandate. They're fanatical about mandates for everybody else, but on these matters they have no mandate. This is their Pandora theory. You know all about the Pandora theory. Once out of the box, once they've established it in law, they believe that you won't be able to change it or anything. This is a single finger salute to you. I'm sorry, madam, but it is. This is a single finger salute to all New Zealanders. We're in charge now. You don't matter. Just like that. This is a politically divisive agenda based on their version of Treaty of Rights. And the Treaty of Rights that was hidden from voters at the last election. They have a version of the Treaty of Waitangi, but it's not the version that most of us accept. It's their version. Their claims of being the most transparent government ever. The most transparent government ever is being exposed daily for the charade it is. And poor old Gaurav Sharma. I mean, or poor young Gaurav Sharma. I don't know the facts, but as a lawyer I know one thing, that when you've got that much evidence, maybe somebody should be examining it, rather than saying, oh, we're the podium of truth. I reject the premises on which that question is based. Yeah. And when is a journalist going to have the guts to say, well, you might, but I'm putting it again? Because I got the premise together, Minister, or dare I say it, Prime Minister, and we live in a free society where we still have a fourth estate, not a bunch of fifth columnists. I was watching this morning on Q&A, and the interviewer was sort of going him as though he was the one at fault, accepting he had all the evidence, that's clear, and he was going to go to a hearing on the Tuesday of this week, accepting the main meeting was held on the Monday of this week, and he wasn't asked. Now, I want to tell you, people who have come from an Indian background, it's bad enough to have this shambles of lawlessness where shops are being smashed and broken into every darn day. But to have someone who comes from a different background, clearly a talented person, the type which New Zealanders need, a doctor no least, deserves better than that. Unbelievable. Every day at a time of economic and social crisis, Labor is pressing on with co-governance, which is one of the things we're here today to talk about. Co-governance, as my friend Shane Jones has said, is bro-governance. That's what this is about. So many of you are struggling to make ends meet. So many of you are busy with the necessities of life, families and work. Who has the time to keep up with this government's cultural and political constant re-engineering? Political engineering, day in, day out. Take, for example, our new health agency, or Whata Ora. Hands up, who knows what that means? Did you say explain it? Why didn't you ask them to explain it before you accepted it? I'm asking again. What do you think it means? Everywhere Labor is hell-bent on fertilising their projects, policies or organisations with artificial Maori names. Now, ladies and gentlemen, all communications, as we all know, everybody has been in a classroom or has been a teacher or anyone associated with education or with marketing or anything, in fact, and particularly when it comes to the All Blacks, everyone knows that all communication is about understanding. But if over 95% can't understand the words that they are hearing or reading, what's the purpose here? Whata Ora. Now, we say artificial because, you know what Whata Ora means? The satisfied eye. But it's not so funny. Answer this question. So which eye are you, the public, being shown as Labor cracks on with its woke-a-man ideology? Sadly, these manufactured names represent a type, and this is a new phrase that's going to be in our lexicon from here on in, a type of cultural intent entitleitis. You got that? You've heard of entitlement? We got this new thing called cultural entitleitis, caused by Labor fabricating the treaty to suit their agenda of co-governance. Cultural entitleitis is a condition where Maori tribes have not an equal say, but a privileged say in our system of public governance. An egregious example is the Canterbury Regional Council Ngai Tahu Representation Act, stopped back in 2019 by New Zealand First, but recently reintroduced and passed in Parliament in our absence. The law allows Ngai Tahu to appoint up to 2 members to the Environment Canterbury Council with full decision-making powers. Everyone else in Canterbury has to campaign, out there on the streets, day in, day out, all the way to October. Everybody in South Island who's Maori or European, who's not Ngāi Tahu, but a Maori or European or whatever background, they've got to go out and campaign all the way to the next local government election, but not Ngāi Tahu. Now, is that the democratic future you voted for in 2020? No. And what an irony. As this was rammed down the country's throat just days ago in Parliament, so has been the name change to our country. Aotearoa was never the Maori name for New Zealand. There's somebody here that was related to, very closely to Bruce Gregory. I remember very well Bruce Gregory saying in Parliament that Nutarani was the name they used at the time of the Treaty of Waitangi. And he's right. And he's right. That name was never the name for New Zealand. But on this attempted change, the government is pressing on. They have no mandate, no referendum, and no vote from you. Again, when did they ever ask you what you think about changing the country's name? We have spent billions of dollars, taxpayers' dollars and private dollars, trying to sell our country's name offshore to the international market. We, since the first export of frozen mutton out of this country in the 1880s, have been an export-dependent nation. People have wrote books about the instability of a dependent economy, dependent upon exporting. We've spent billions trying to sell this country's name to the international market. Exports is critical to us. It's one of the pathways to our future wealth. Exports, not the printing of government money or your money, is one pathway to a better future. And the name of the country behind our exports has been a critical part of our marketing. Yet every day on television and radio, using your taxpayer funds without any consent from you, they seek to impose a name change on our country. Every day, every night, using your money, Radio New Zealand and TVNZ and many others are changing the name of this country, and they've never, ever asked you. It is though that what you think doesn't matter. And the further irony is the arrogance of imposing a name change for New Zealand whilst ignoring the whole of the South Island, and guess what? Ngāi Tahu. Ngāi Tahu's name for the South Island is Te Wai Pounamu. That's their name for the South Island. So Ngāi Tahu get two people on the council and lose their majestic name and mana of the place where they live. What's going on here? It's an insult to Ngāi Tahu. It's an insult to everybody in the South Island. And this would be comical if it wasn't so serious. Sadly, we've got another thing at the moment, not just cultural entitleitis, but treaty entitleitis as well. It's spreading in the government and bureaucracy. Everywhere you go, they've all got a principles of the Treaty of Waitangi clause in their contracts, which they're abiding by. Except none of them can tell you what the principles are. Truly, I've been to universities. I've seen students, I've seen lecturers. I've said to them, okay, so you tell me what the principles are you're talking about from this three-clause document. And then you want to see the spin and the hand-waving. As though being at an Italian restaurant is a substitute for debate. You want to see the hand-waving, but you're paying for it. Even the police are not immune. Their belated anti-gang push is called tauwhiro. That's a phrase from the Maori calendar. What that's got to do with lawlessness and crime in our streets, I don't know. And the Labour Party has established a separate Maori health agency, or Te Aka is its name. A word, I thought I'd better go and see an expert about this. So I asked Sham Jones, he said, what? You're talking about vegetables because it's a taproot. I said, no, Shane, stop kidding. I'm talking about the new agency. What does it mean to make sure nobody gets it wrong? He said, it's a taproot. This is just more woke elitism. Labor believes it knows best. and New Zealanders are growing more alarmed. They know Labour has no authority to rank our citizenship based on race. And that's what's going on here. They're ranking citizenship based on race. A system change where the treaty overrides means a Maori veto for so many policies at the central or local government level. And ladies and gentlemen, you're the one that's paying for it. If you doubt that, look at the Resource Management Act. This statutory rat's nest has led to distortion of Maori beliefs. Local council proceedings dealing with your issues, applications, permits, are bogged down with unmandated cultural mutation. Too many have become afraid to challenge many fairy-like accounts of history. It's actually quite astonishing. I can remember once at a meeting saying, "Are you telling me that you've detoured the road because there's a taniwha on the corner?" This is true, on the Waikato Expressway. "Yes, lady," just like you, they looked at me and said, "Yes, because there's a taniwha there." Now, with the greatest respect, you know, we're in the 21st century. And the cultural gatekeepers and fellow travellers dismiss alternative views and perspectives as being racist, or members in the Tin Hat Brigade. The moment you say it, you're a racist, or you're in the Tin Hat Brigade. The gaslighting cancel culture is growing in New Zealand, and we need to stop it in its tracks right here and right now. Largely untested, often indulged, these tikanga traffickers are a paralysis on development, and you're paying for it. And it's adding huge burdens, hidden burdens to so many ordinary officials and businesses, huge costs to all New Zealanders, including Maori. Private property rights are taken hostage while Maori cultural statutory provisions are twisted and turned. If you doubt that, ask your lawyer, if you can afford him or her, or developer, what percentage of cost increase this has meant on your new house purchase. You will be staggered. What was once one of the greatest property-owning democracies in the world is rapidly sliding into housing unaffordability and crippling renting for life. And all the while, the critical four issues to uplift Maori development, in whose name they make all these other policy claims, are gathering dust in our country's history. Treaty entitleitis is a diversion, a detour, a roadblock to real Maori progress. And having miserably failed Maori on the four things they really want, today's Labour Party, with a largely bought-off compliant press, boasts about progress on the things that ordinary Maori never asked for, whilst ignoring those needs they do want to have addressed. The recent diatribe by the Honourable Willie Jackson, which slams the one person, one vote outrage. Did you see that? He let loose. Slamming the one person, one vote outrage is aiming not only for its content but its ignorance of history. Alarming. Alarming that someone at that level should know so little about history, the facts and the essence of democracy. He claims that the recently passed Ngāi Tahu bill is how, and I quote him, "a partnership promised in the treaty is fulfilled," end of quotes. Just like that. Another guy used to be on the weather report, Tamati Kafi. He said, "Oh, we're tweaking democracy. We're tweaking democracy." When he's not feeding his baby in the house. Right? Don't laugh. This is the citadel of a democracy of over 5 million people and serious business. There's a lot of work to be done. But he said they're tweeting democracy. And Willie said it's how a partnership promised in the treaty is fulfilled. Examine those words. A partnership promised in the treaty. Apparently those that disagree are weaponising one person, one vote. See that? He's got his excuse helmet already ready. He says if you oppose that, you're weaponising one person, one vote. What a way to argue about democracy. When he says that, of course, is a piece of linguistic gymnastics that no Democrat can follow. Then he leapt from the UK and to the USA when he said that the UK House of Lords is not one person, one vote. And that the US Electoral College is not one person, one vote. Ladies and gentlemen, this is chilling. This is in the 21st century. Is chilling. Clearly an absence of historic understanding of how those two institutions began or exist is not of concern to him. Then he trumps that, excuse the pun, that MMP, it's not one person, two votes, he says. It's not one person, one vote, it's one person, two votes. The fact that every voter is at the same level where they vote one time or twice under MMP utterly escapes him. This is the prelude to his claim that, quotes, the moment New Zealand extends the universal suffrage of representation promised to the Indigenous people of our country, there is outrage. See that again? It's 1840, it's the 6th of February, and he's saying right there that day, this suffrage was promised to the New Zealand people and to Maori. This is breathtaking. And why hasn't some journalist or some political scientist taken him up on it? I'm asking this question, where is the constitutional and legal expert leading the charge on the government's behalf on these matters? There isn't one, not visibly, but there's a gravy train with all manner of advisors making a fortune out of these changes based on their version of what happened on the 6th of February 1840. There are many Maori businesses in this country that don't need paternalistic, we know best for you, treatment from central or local government. And here's the question, does the treaty mean partnership? It's truly staggering that a claim of partnership for Maori is being made based on the Treaty of Waitangi when Queen Victoria was not in partnership with anyone in the UK or the British Empire on the day before, that's the 6th of February 1840, or the day after. They're claiming that there was a partnership on the 6th of February 1840, and the franchise and all these other issues arise from that. When on the 5th of February 1840 and the 7th of February 1840, Queen Victoria was never in partnership with anybody in the UK or around the whole of the British Empire. When is someone going to challenge these people on that ridiculous allegation? And again, look at history. There was no universal suffrage anywhere in the world in 1840. And hence to say universal suffrage was on the mind of either the British or the Maori on the 6th of February 1840 is just plain ridiculous. And when is someone going to say that to them? And then if local body representation, here comes the rub, because you're going to vote in local government up here very shortly in October. And then on local body representation, if it's a direct connection of ratepayers to democracy, then why should someone paying rates in a local body area not be entitled to vote in that local body election? Is that a fair question? I'm paying rates up here. Surely I should be able to pick the council up here. And Labor parliamentarians recently claimed they would sort that anomaly out too. That's what they said. The minister said, it's part of our study. We don't think that if you've got a house in Whangarei and a house in Auckland, you should get 2 local government votes. How do you like that? Pay the rates, of course. This is classic. Whenever they vote, if ratepayers have more than one property in more than one local body area, their vote is worth the same as any other ratepayer in that local body area. You remember the American War of Independence? No taxation without representation, which led to the American Civil War of Independence, as I say, is now being regarded by some members of Parliament as wrong. And we're going to fix it, they say. Ladies and gentlemen, there's the extraordinary leap of logic. Willie excuses the current government's attempts to gerrymander democracy as being, quotes, a genuine engagement to build bridges, not walls. There's a new word for the lexicon. This is a willy-mander. But he also pointed out, and I'm happy to give you the facts behind this, something else. He said, quotes, we are using the co-governance architecture that National and Act built, end of quotes. And you're saying to me, how come? Ladies and gentlemen, do you remember the super city? You're up here and it was rammed down your throat, right? You don't belong in the super city of Auckland, nor does Franklin. But it was rammed down your throat, and for good measure, they put a Maori entity on the super city, not elected by the rest of the people who are ratepayers in your super city. That's one. The second one was, having had it refused and rejected when I was the foreign minister, after Labor and after National got in 2008, they went off to the UN and signed up the Indigenous rights document, and the rest is history. And so did ACT. So Willie is right about that, just in case some of you might have forgotten the heritage and the background here. Mr. Jackson's defence is that we, quotes, we have a new democracy since MMP was introduced in 1996. More women, more Maori, and then more Pacifica and ethnic minorities in Parliament. Now, what's strange about that is, I don't recall when we were on the front line in the campaign for MMP in the late 80s and early 90s, ever seeing Willie Jackson and his ilk on the campaign with us. As previously mentioned, the Royal Commission that led to MMP foresaw that in time many Maori, far more Maori, would be in Parliament, and that we would no longer have the need for a separate franchise. And yet, having grabbed the best of MMP, Willie and his ilk do not want to give up the worst of first past the post. When New Zealand first arrived in Parliament as a party in 1993, getting a bit historical here. When New Zealand first arrived in Parliament as a party in 1993, it was under first past the post, not MMP. Again, the sad thing is that while many politicians push or succumb to pet projects for a certain Maori elite, the mass majority of Maori needing housing, health, education and first world incomes remain on the scrap heap of their political contents and concerns. The proponents of Cove governance base their arguments on the treaty, as I said, being a partnership. How they arrived at that conclusion is a legal, constitutional and linguistic mystery. They have never been able to explain the origins and historical foundations for their claims. Nor can they tell us why former Maori leaders in this country of the intellectual and cultural superiority of Sir Apirana Ngata, Sir Maui Pomare and Sir Peter Buck never made those claims that these legal and constitutional revisionists are making today. These preeminent three leaders never made such a claim. And Ngata was someone who got a law degree in 2 years flat. Pretty bright guy. Far brighter than Willie. Far brighter than all put together. He never made that claim. But no, here's someone who wouldn't know what the inside of the law institution was unless he was in front of a trial, and he's laying out the constitutional framework of the country. You know, the moment the Court of Appeal in the 1987 Lands case handed down its judgment, certain Maori, having protested for years that the treaty is a fraud, all of a sudden started arguing that the treaty was a partnership. Just like that. There are people here who can remember that. The treaty is a fraud. Hello, the next day, it's a partnership. And sadly, since 1987, hundreds of millions of dollars have been spent in our universities teaching students a distortion of that case. When asked to explain what in that case gives them the right to make a claim of partnership, they avoid answering the question because they can't, in favour of their own misconceived interpretation. Partnership, is a constitutional legal sense, was never ever part of the 1987 case. but it's on the deliberate misconstruction of that case that claims have been made over and over and over again. The fact that their claims wouldn't have required the Court of Appeal in 1987 to ignore the words and meanings of the Treaty of Waitangi is flippantly dismissed. The Treaty of Waitangi is expressly about equality. Equality before the law. See the paradox here? In the Treaty of Waitangi, governance was conferred on the Crown. The tribal leaders ceded, conceded or yielded government to the Queen. That is why down through the decades, Maori have often sought, when in dispute with the New Zealand government, to take their complaint to the British monarchy, having ceded their sovereignty to her. The rule of law is enshrined in the treaty by reason of the treaty's promise of equality. In addition, equality under the law is a basic element of the rule of law. And that means policies that create inequalities under the law are repugnant to the rule of law. Likewise, any policy that discriminates against race or equality in dignity and rights is contrary to the Treaty of Waitangi. So what are we going to do about it? It's come to that time when you stop relaxing and start getting worried, because it's come to that time we're not putting around a tithing basket and asking for 10% of your income, but we're asking you to do something about saving your country. Ladies and gentlemen, we can have co-governance without democracy, or we can have democracy without co-governance. But we cannot have democracy and co-governance. Remember this. We can have co-governance without democracy, or we can have democracy without co-governance, but we cannot have democracy and co-governance. And here today we meet at an inflection in New Zealand's history, a tipping point. We've come to the crossroads, so to speak, or rather, we've been pushed to it, and we have to make a decision. The very foundations of our democracy, with all its faults, have been a privilege for us to live under all these years. Democracy for us has meant freedom, which so many populations around the world and down through the centuries have never had the good fortune to experience. New Zealand men and women have put their lives on the line to defend our democracy. And we are the lucky beneficiaries of the aspirations, dreams, sacrifices and hard work of others before us. But we should remember the famous lines of John Philpott Curran all those years ago in 1796. The condition on which God has given liberty to man is eternal vigilance. We have got to do something about what's going on in our democracy. You know, the condition on which God has given liberty to man is eternal vigilance. And today, for months, the people of Ukraine have been fighting for their freedom, gained a mere 3 decades ago. They should be an inspiration to us. As we go to the next election, we have got to join forces and make a commitment to save our democracy. For this will be an election like no other in our time. If we don't win in this so critical cause and save our democracy, our people face a bleak future like so many other nations. Nations which found out all too late that insidious elements in their systems of government, unchallenged, led to tyranny, abuse, inequalities, and a slide to the third world, and consequent misery for all but the privileged few. Ladies and gentlemen, politics is a strange business. It can do so much damage to people. But conversely, it can do so much good for people, and faster than any other profession I know. And we're here talking about the second part of that equation. With that in mind, I ask you to get ready to make a commitment today, right here and right now, to be unwavering in our work to save our country. If you do, your nation's future for your children and grandchildren is guaranteed. Democracy, if you do, will prevail. but it is now or never. We oppose co-governance. We oppose Three Waters takeover. We oppose our country's name being changed. We oppose separatism in policy and in law. We support policies based on need, not race. We support the rule of law where everyone is equal before it. We support the right of free speech. And that means we support the right of New Zealanders to say, I disagree, and not be mandated out of existence, not being mandated into being second-class citizens and losing their jobs, careers, or their rights to make a living. We support the fundamental right of New Zealanders to disagree with government policy and not be punished for it. And we are never going to work in Parliament with any political party whose policies threaten these fundamental rights. Every party out there should be hearing this message very clear. We are never going to work in Parliament with any political party whose policies threaten these fundamental rights. We support democracy, and we are going to win.